Hi everyone, David here again with TackleShare. Thanks a lot for powering through parts 1 and 2 of the regulation summary. I know that they can be a little bit dry, but let's power through to what really matters and what really counts for you and I. And let me walk you through how to read the regulations and decide which lake to go to, what you can catch, and the exceptions, because that's really the awkward part of reading them. Let's get to it. I've created this flow chart to make it easier for myself and hopefully you at home to follow the steps that you need to figure out what you can and can't catch depending on the lake you're on. So I've simplified it down to what zone are you fishing. So what lake are you in or where are you planning to go, the general information for that zone. Then we need to look at the zone-wide seasons and limits depending on the fish that we want to catch. Then we need to double check that those don't go over the provincial possession limits so that we're not overdoing that. Then we need to look at species exceptions. There are several species exceptions throughout, and then water body exceptions, and finally fish sanctuaries. So that does sound like a lot, but I'm going to walk you through 5 different zones and we'll build up to it so that it becomes second nature. And I encourage you to practice this at home. So pick a lake that you want to fish and highlight in the document, either online or in hard copy, what you can and can't fish, and walk yourself through it, because the more you do this, the easier it is, and it becomes second nature and doesn't take much time at all. So let's start with zone 1 because it's the shortest section and easy to follow. Just a quick recap. Zone 1, way up in the far north, so not a lot of us will be fishing up there, but it's a good one to start to understand how this works. All right, so page 23 is the map for zones 1, 2, and 3. So let's focus on zone 1. It looks like there's Polar Bear Provincial Park, which is in there. It's a protected area, and across the whole zone, there is no use or possession of live bait fish. So you will need to use worms or artificial lures if you're fishing in zone 1. So that's across the board. And the only thing to mention for zone 2 is that there's this extra little part down here where Lake Sturgeon is also closed all year. So let's get into zone 1. So following the steps that I've outlined to make it easy for myself and hopefully you at home, we know we're in zone 1. So we're going to go to the next section, general information. So that's always the first part that's listed. So it's asking to see general fishing regulations. So those are the part 1 and part 2 that we've already covered about licensing and invasive species. So it is asking you to reference that. In zone 1, only one barbless hook may be used and live fish may not be used as bait or possessed for use as bait. So that was mentioned on the map we just showed, but it's also reiterating that you may only use barbless hooks in zone 1 and only minnows or artificial bait. So no live fish may be used as bait, so no minnows. And then it's also talking about the following species are not present in this zone and are closed to fishing all year: Atlantic salmon, brown trout, channel catfish, crappie, largemouth and smallmouth bass, muskellunge, rainbow trout, splake, sunfish, and Pacific salmon. So they are not found in zone 1 and therefore they are closed to fishing all year. Step 3 is to see what the zone-wide seasons and limits are. So that's always following general information, and it lists these 7 or 8 species and the seasons and limits. So the aggregate limits for trout and salmon, remember that's the total amount of trout or salmon of any species in those groups. You have a limit of 5 for sport fishing, 2 for conservation license, and the total daily catch and possession limit for all trout and salmon species combined. Brook trout is listed. So brook trout up in zone 1, the season is January 1st to September 30th. Again, you can get 5 or 2, and they cannot be more than 1. Not more than 1 can be greater than 40 centimeters. So you can catch one single large one and 4 smaller ones for sport fishing, or 1 large one over 40 centimeters long and 1 small one under conservation you can catch and keep.
Lake Sturgeon has a season of January 1st to April 30th. Then it closes from April, well, I guess that would be May 1st, all the way through the end of June, and then it reopens July 1st to December 31st. So without looking it up, my guess is it closes for 2 months during the spawning period so that we aren't fishing for that species while it's trying to spawn and create the next generation of lake sturgeon. And also note that the limits for lake sturgeon are S0C0, so that means you may not keep either of these. It's just catch and release, but you are allowed to fish for them, catch and release. Lake trout is open all year. That's awesome. So January 1st to December 31st, you can go out and get lake trout through the ice in the open water. You can have a limit of 3 and 1, and remember that also is added to your limit of trout or salmon to get your aggregate limit. Lake whitefish are open all year as well. You may keep 12 with sport fishing or 6, so those are higher limits. I think that matches the provincial limit. So if you have a great day fishing lake whitefish, you can get 12 of any size and take them home and fry them up with a sport fishing license. Northern pike, again, open all year. The limits are 6 for sport fishing, but only 2 of them can be bigger than 61 centimeters, and 1 of them can be over 86 centimeters. So 1 really large one, 1 pretty large one, and then 4 smaller ones would be your maximum limit per day and then per possession for northern pike. And same with conservation, you can catch 1 really large one, 1 pretty darn large one, and then that would be your limit because you have a limit of 2. Walleye and Sauger, again, those species are very closely related. They are open all year, and the limits are S4C2, so you can catch 4 walleye or 4 sauger or 2 of each, but those are combined, and not more than 1 greater than 46 centimeters. Again, the goal is to try to keep the largest species, the ones that have lived the longest, reproducing to help the population continue to either maintain or grow. So usually the largest fish are the best spawners, both males and females. They're the ones that are keeping the population steady or growing, which allows us to catch a lot of the smaller ones. And then yellow perch are open all year, and you can catch 50 yellow perch and keep them a day with a sport fishing, or 25 with conservation of any size. There's no size limit listed. So those are zone-wide seasons and limits. Let's just double check and cross-check with the provincial possession limits to double check that we don't have limits across the province. When we look at the provincial possession limits, there are some slight variations that we need to take into account. So Atlantic salmon, Aurora trout are not present in Zone 1. Brook trout has a provincial limit of 5, but it also has a provincial or a zone limit of 5 as well, so that one matches up nicely. There's no channel catfish or crappie. Lake trout has a provincial limit of 3 and has a zone limit of 3, so that works out really well. Lake fish provincially has 25 limit. In Zone 1, it has 12 limit per day. So you could catch 12 today and 12 tomorrow and still be under the 25 limit, but you can only catch 12 per day because Zone 1 has a reduced take for lake whitefish to help keep that population strong. Northern pike has a limit of 6 in this Zone 1, and it has a provincial limit of 6, so those match up perfectly. Excellent. And let's see, walleye and sauger. So another slight variation, you can have 6 provincially and 4 per day in Zone 1. So we could catch 4 today, but only 2 tomorrow unless we've eaten one to get to 6, because we can only have 6 on hand at any one time. Or we could catch 3 today if we didn't quite max out our limit, and then catch another 3 tomorrow. And yellow perch, again, the limit is 50, so you can catch 50 in Zone 1 per day. You can have a maximum of 100, so we could get 50 today, 50 tomorrow, and we wouldn't be able to catch any more yellow perch anywhere in the province until we started to eat the 100 that we already caught. That's just so that we don't overcatch and it reduces the risk of spoil by having too many fish in your freezer that never get eaten. The next step is number 5, species exceptions. That would normally fall below zone-wide seasons. In this case, there are no species exceptions. There are also no water body exceptions, where it would show a lake with a different limit than these ones we went over. And there are no fish sanctuaries that are highlighted for Zone 1. So Zone 1 is pretty straightforward. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 species of fish that you can reliably catch, and most of those match up with the provincial limits. So Zone 1 is pretty straightforward, as long as you keep in mind the general rules and you're only using barbless hooks and no live minnows. Let's go to a slightly more difficult one to understand, Zone 2. So there's a few more extra tidbits found in here. So again, Zone 2, general information we need to follow. If we go back a page, general information. There are a couple extra rules here. So non-Canadian residents camping on Crown land must follow the conservation fishing license. Even if they bought a sport fishing license, they would have to follow the lesser numbers, the C numbers, C2, C25. Rainbow smelt may not be used as bait or possessed for use as bait. Live fish may not be used as bait or possessed for use as bait in all waters north of this baseline longitude. I don't have that on a map, but if you plug that in, you could figure out that above that level, no live bait. Below that, you can use live bait, except not rainbow smelt. The following water bodies, or parts of them, have different regulations that are listed in the water body exceptions. Lake St. Joseph, Opapamiskin Lake, and Sydney Lake area. So we'll get to those in a minute. And the following species are not present in Zone 2: Atlantic salmon, channel catfish, crappie, and Pacific salmon. So there's a few more species in Zone 2 that we didn't find in Zone 1, if we recall that. So there's a couple extra ones that we have some limits for, so Zone 2 has a little bit more opportunity for fishing. Going on to Step 3, here are the zone-wide limits. For this example, let's target brook trout. So the season in Zone 2 is January 1st to Labor Day. You're allowed 5 with sport fishing, 2 with conservation, and only one of them can be greater than 30 centimeters. The other 4, or the other 1, has to be smaller. Now let's make sure that that matches or changes with the provincial possession limits. Brook trout have a possession limit of 5 and a catch limit of 5, so that works out nicely. They're the same, one and the same. If I catch 5 today, I can't catch any more until I eat some of them, because the provincial maximum is 5. Step 5 over on this chart is species exceptions. So let's go over here and look, there's a species exceptions, and there is one for brook trout. They don't always have them, but additional fishing opportunities typically means that they're stocking brook trout in these 5 lakes to give us more opportunity to recreational fish. The season is open all year, so remember, the brook trout season is normally, for the whole zone, only open January 1st to Labor Day. For these 5 lakes, it's open all year, so that gives more fishing opportunities from Labor Day until December 31st. The catch limits are the same, 5 and the catch limits are the same, S5, C2, which match the zone limits. However, there are no size limits for these 5 lakes that are stocked. So you can catch the 5 biggest fish or 5 of any size that you want, whereas in the other lakes in the zone, aside from these 5 that are stocked, you can only catch 1 that is bigger than 30 centimeters. So that gives you an extra opportunity to catch big fish in these stocked lakes. For the purpose of making it simple with Zone 2 that has only a few species exceptions, I'm going to briefly touch on them. Lake Sturgeon normally is catch and release within these season dates. However, as mentioned on that previous map, there's a section of Zone 2 that is closed all year. even for catch and release, it's closed. So this section right here on the Manitoba border, it gives the coordinates in the exception, cannot be fished for lake sturgeon. Lake trout, the zone limit is 2 for sport fishing. For these two lakes though, an exception is only 1 for sport fishing and 0 for conservation. So if you only have a conservation license, these two lakes, you can only catch and release lake trout. This particular lake, Echoing Lake, has sport fishing of S1 in 1 day and possession limit of 2. Only one of them can be over 65 centimeters, and with conservation, that single one you're allowed can be any size. And then there are some different limits for these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lakes, S2, C1, and only one can be larger than 56 centimeters, which is slightly different, where one of them has no size limit and one can be over 56 centimeters between these dates. The last species exception are walleye and sauger. They have a season January 1st to April 14th, and then June 10th to December 31st on Little Jackfish River. It describes the section of the river that it applies to, and those are the limits, S2, C2, and not more than one greater than 46 centimeters. So if we go back to the zone limits, the difference there is that Jackfish River closes a bit longer, so you can only start fishing that, June 10th, whereas the rest of the province you can start fishing again in May, and the limits are 4 and 2, but in this particular Little Jackfish River, it's 2 and 2. So let's go back to brook trout and see if there are water body exceptions which will affect brook trout fishing. So that is following species exceptions, water body exceptions. And Lake St. Joseph, only one barbless hook may be used. Non-Canadian residents require a special tag which is available at no charge from the Lake St. Joseph tourist operators. Again, very specific to this lake, but worth noting if you're going up that way. There is a fish sanctuary, no fishing from March 1st to June 14th in the following areas, and it gives you coordinates. So you're going to need those coordinates to plug them into an online map if you're going to figure out exactly where they apply. And my guess is if you go to a tourist operator, they'll be able to tell you. They'll know the lake really well. But other than that, if we're going for brook trout, and there are brook trout in this Lake St. Joseph, and I don't know if there are or not, I haven't looked that up, we have to use a barbless hook, and we cannot fish from March 1st to June 14th in this area. Opapa-Miskin Lake, it's only catch and release. So for the brook trout found in that lake, only catch and release, whereas normally, if we go back, we can catch 5 or 2. That lake, only catch and release. And then the third water body exception is Sydney Lake area. It gives you where that is, and species-based regulations for all non-Canadian anglers. So as a Canadian angler myself, these do not apply to me, but if I was visiting Canada from the States or another location, these would apply. So we were looking for brook trout, and there are no water body exceptions on Sydney Lake for brook trout. That might mean that there aren't any in that lake. So if we were looking for lake trout, there would be a slight reduction in limit for non-Canadian anglers. So that's what we have to check for water body exceptions, and then we have to check for fish sanctuaries. It's a tongue twister a little bit. And Zone 2 does have a few. So no fishing, closed all year on Zemel Lake. I'm not sure where that is, but if you look on the map or type it into Google Maps, you'll find Zemel Lake, and doesn't matter what you're fishing, including brook trout that we were going for, no fishing. Same thing for Kagama River and Upper Twin Lake between April 1st and June 14th. So those also would apply if we were trying to get brook trout in those areas. would not be able to fish there. And the same thing except for March 1st to June 14th. So a month earlier, this is closed on this river and Lake St. Joseph, which was already mentioned. So even if we had possession limits, species exceptions were okay, water body exceptions were okay, if there happens to be a fish sanctuary listed, that would supersede everything else for that time frame. It's just something to keep in mind, that to not stop at the zone seasons and limits, you really do need to cross-reference all the way to fish sanctuaries to see if there's any restrictions for your fishing. We're going to go to zone 15 now, but as I went through the regulations, I just came across this ad. OPG is the title sponsor of the TackleShare program, and we want to remind everyone to stay clear and stay safe of hydro dams and stations. So that's across the province. Just keep an eye out and avoid fishing close to them for your safety as well as others. Let's look at Zone 15 next, and the reason I picked this is because it encompasses Algonquin Provincial Park, which has some different rules, as well as a lot of these tiny lakes are heavily fished because of Southern Ontario anglers coming up to fish in the winter and summer, and they have a lot of different exceptions that I wanted to highlight. So here's Zone 15 on page 103, and just keep in mind that it's the zone that covers Algonquin Park. So we are in Zone 15, following the 7 steps. We've got general information, so again, double check the parts 1 and 2 of this video series for that info. Zone 3, season and limits for this zone. Actually, sorry, let's go back to general information. There are a number of brook trout and lake trout water bodies that have species-specific regulations in addition to restrictions related to gear, bait, and fish sanctuaries. These additional restrictions are applicable to the whole water body, regardless of what species is or are being targeted. And then it says go to the exceptions, which I'll cover a few examples. So in general speaking, even if you're not going for brook trout or lake trout, if you're going for let's say just sunfish, you're just going for sunfish off the dock, if there's a rule for only using artificial bait for brook trout and lake trout on a particular water body, you are also only allowed to use artificial bait if you're going for sunfish. So a little bit more confusing, but let's work through a few examples. The following water bodies or portions of them have different regulations that are listed in the water body exceptions. All of Algonquin Park, which I mentioned, and then a whole other list. So this is where it's really important to know the lake you're on and to know its rough coordinates, because there are countless clear lakes and turtle lakes and zone-wide seasons and limits. Again, let's look at brook trout. It's a good one to look at in Zone 15 because of all the stocked lakes that have slightly different versions. So generally speaking, in Zone 15, you can fish for brook trout from January 1st to September 30th, and you have a limit of 5 or 2. So keep those in mind. The next step is number 4, provincial possession limits. Let's double check with brook trout. So provincially, you can have 5. Zone 15, you can also have 5. So those match up nicely, so we don't need to go back and forth with provincial limits. To make it easiest, I put the zone limits up here as we go to the species exceptions, step 5. So there's a long list for brook trout, which is a great thing. That means that all of these lakes, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry are stocking brook trout so that you and I have a greater opportunity to fish for them. And that funding comes directly from the license sales that I buy and you buy every year. So keep that in mind when you're buying your license. That goes right back into stocking these lakes. The first section that is listed for brook trout are additional fishing opportunities. Again, these are the lakes that they stock, and where the season is open all year. So I happen to have been on Burdock Lake previously, so I can show you, if you're not sure where these lakes are, what I'm going to do is copy these coordinates, bring up Google Maps, but what I figured out is you have to delete the periods after the N and the W with the way these are set up. Hit enter, and it zooms in to the lake. Now this one has Burdock Lake listed. Some of these lakes in Ontario, there's so many that they don't have it listed, so you really need to rely on the coordinates to know the lake is accurate on Google Maps. So what this is saying is I can fish for brook trout year-round on Burdock Lake because it is stocked, and this exception overrides the general season January 1st to September 30th. So in this case, it gives me an extra 4 months to fish for brook trout. Let's try Mitchell Lake. So again, brook trout, open all year, Mitchell Lake. Let's copy these coordinates and put them in because there are a few Mitchell Lakes in Ontario. I'm going to delete the periods, and there's Mitchell Lake. It's showing me a blank lake, but if I zoom out, even though it says Baptiste Lake, that's up here. So that's just Google Maps sometimes isn't accurate. You can't rely on this 100%. You need to use the coordinates. So this is Mitchell Lake, and it is also open up year-round for brook trout. The next exception for brook trout on these lakes that are stocked, they're open all year, same as the ones we just looked at, but there's a bait restriction. Live fish may not be used as bait or possessed for use as bait, regardless of what species is being targeted. So if you are targeting brook trout, you cannot use live bait, you cannot use live fish as bait. So minnows, you can still use worms, or you can use artificial lures. Even if you're going for sunfish, you may not use minnows because this lake prevents any live minnows from being used to catch brook trout. Still with brook trout, these 4 lakes here have a limit of 2 and 2. Instead of 5 and 2, you can only catch 2 with the sport fishing, and all of them must be greater than 36 centimeters. So this one is a little different than what we looked at in zone number 2, because they're encouraging you to catch the ones that are older and not the ones that are less than 36 centimeters and were put in more recently. This exception is also related to gear. Only artificial lures may be used regardless of what you are fishing for. So you need to use artificial lures on these 4 lakes, regardless of whether you're looking for sunfish or brook trout or any other species. And any that you keep of brook trout need to be over 36 centimeters. The next exception for brook trout is S2C2, a little bit different again, but these ones must be even larger, must be greater than 46 centimeters, so another 10 centimeters in length, and again, only artificial lures, and that is only on Westward Lake in Peck Township. So unless you're fishing that one, you don't need to worry about this one at all. The same thing with these next 2. If you're not fishing these 2 lakes listed, you can totally ignore this one because it doesn't apply to zone 15 generally. The next larger one is for the season. So sometimes there can be season limits or catch limits or gear restrictions or bait restrictions. I hope this isn't being too confusing, but we need to know the rules. So for the season, zone 15 for brook trout, it is open 4th Saturday in April to September 30th. Usually brook trout is open Jan 1 to September 30th. So this is saying there is no ice fishing season is what this really means. The open water season, open water meaning no ice on the water, is open the 4th Saturday in April until September 30th. So that's the same end date. The limits are the same, S5, C2, but there is again a size limit. So any brook trout you catch must be greater than 28 centimeters. And again, you may not use minnows or even possess minnows. If you're not using them on your line, you can't even have them in your bucket if you're on these lakes, because they're going to assume that you're using them. So again, recap. Brook trout, zone 15, a shorter season, no ice fishing on these lakes. Same limits, except they must be over 28 centimeters, and you cannot use minnows on the following 10 or 12 lakes. And I just want to highlight another one here, because this is another Mitchell Lake in McClure Township. So the other one that we looked at was in a different township. It was in Herschel Township. So this is where you just need to know that you're right on the right Mitchell Lake. So in this case, if I'm looking for McClure Township, what I is I had to go to so on these 10 or 12 lakes, let's find this Mitchell Lake because it's a different one. This one's in McClure Township. I already looked on Google Maps and it didn't have it. So when I go to just Google generally, and I type in Mitchell Lake, McClure Township, I get this mine data, or minedat.org. So let's click that and see what happens. And this shows where it is. So if we cross-reference this McClure Township, because a lot of these are really old, before amalgamation of areas. So it's in Hastings County, which we know is in Zone 15 when we look at that map. And McClure Township is here for Mitchell Lake. Whereas the other Mitchell Lake, I know just from experience that it's closer over here in close to Algonquin Park, where Baptiste was. That's over this way, so this is a different Mitchell Lake. So you can't always go into Google Maps because they won't have some of these really old township names in it. One more thing for brook trout, there's on Nelson Lake, again, a shorter season, so no ice fishing and no minnows. But this one does not have size limits. That's the only reason this one is separate from one of the other ones. This one. These are basically the same, except this one doesn't have limits, whereas this one does for size. They have a whole bunch of lake trout lakes, or lakes that are stocked with lake trout, also listed. I'm not going to go into details, but you just have to search where it is. And again, this is still Zone 15. Lots of great opportunity for lake trout. These ones, again, follow the same pattern. I'm not going to go through that, but you get the hang of it. And I want you to practice, because the more you practice, the better and quicker you get, and you won't get caught accidentally fishing in the wrong area. There are slightly different limits or exceptions for muskie down here, just on the Pickerel River, and walleye also has slightly different limits or seasons. So a different season on Chateau Lake and different catch limits on these 6 lakes that are stocked because they're under additional opportunities still. I won't go into those, but I'm just noting them. So those were a lot of species exceptions. Basically, they were almost all for brook trout and lake trout, though. Now let's look at water body exceptions. So in Algonquin Park, live fish may not be used as bait or possessed for use as bait. So again, no minnows in Algonquin Park. They do not want any minnows spreading and becoming an invasive species there. Dip nets and bait fish traps may not be used to harvest bait fish. So you can leave those at home or in the car. You can't catch bait fish in Algonquin Park lakes. And it is a fish sanctuary across the board from January 1st to the Friday before the fourth Saturday in April, and December 1st to December 31st. What this generally covers is the ice fishing season, when the park is not really running. It's open along the highway, but most things are closed. I don't know the background behind that. It could be an access issue. It could be a rescue issue, trying to rescue people in backwater lakes in the ice. It could be a safety issue, but let me walk you through this statement, because you're going to see these a few times where it talks about from January 1st to the Friday before the fourth Saturday in April. So what I typically do, I just brought an online calendar up here for reference. I start from the back of this statement. So December 1st to December 31st is straightforward. You're not allowed to fish in Algonquin Park lakes. The fourth Saturday in April, if we look on the 2021 calendar, the fourth Saturday, 1, 2, 3, 4, is April 24th. There's no fishing from January 1st to the Friday before the fourth Saturday in April. So the Friday, the 23rd, before the fourth Saturday in April. So long story short, you can start to fish in Algonquin Park on April 24th, the Saturday, all the way until November 30th. The reason they word it this way is because every year the dates slightly change, and they try to keep it so that it's always the fourth Saturday in April that you can start fishing, regardless of the number. If they changed it to 24th next year, that might fall on a Monday, and then you're missing out on a weekend of fishing. So for 2021, what this statement right here says is that you can fish from April 24th to November 30th. The rest, all of December and January, February, March, up until the April 23rd, are closed for fishing of any species in Zone 15 in Algonquin Park. There's another water body exception for Bonnechere River. I'm not going to go into the details, but you can look up where exactly that exception is on the river. It's not the whole river, but it lists where. And that is no fishing from March 1st to the Friday before the third Saturday in May. So if we look at the calendar again, the third Saturday in May this year is May 15th. You can start to fish the Bonnechere River in these sections. And you can do so before, but not from March 1st till May 14th. There's another page listing a whole bunch of different lakes and rivers. If you're fishing on these, you need to read them and understand them the same way I've gone through. If you're not fishing on them, you can totally ignore this page and continue. Still going with water body exceptions all the way through to Wendigo Lake. And then we get into bait restrictions. So live fish may not be used as bait or possessed for use as bait. So again, minnows is what they're talking about, and you may not use minnows on these lakes. A lot of these were already referenced previously under the Brook Trout limits, exceptions, excuse me, but again, just double check that the lake you're on, if you're on Donut Lake or Laurier Lake, that you're not using minnows. The way it's worded, you can still use worms. The last section is fish sanctuaries. So no fishing, closed all year. So we already mentioned that there are some areas where there's no fishing, period. Could be for a variety of reasons. Could be the fishery has been really hit hard. Could be some changes that they've noticed. Maybe they're trying to let it come back. Or I don't know what the other reasons are. Maybe if you want to comment, you can tell me what reasons are for these ones. But these lakes, from Chipmunk Lake all the way down to Stringer Lake, there's no fishing for any species all year. So if you live on those lakes, you can't fish them. If you see anyone fishing on them, they shouldn't be. So just avoid them because there's lots of other lakes that you can fish. On these lakes here, Lake Joseph and Little Lake Joseph, there's no fishing from January 1st to the Friday before Family Day. So let's go to that calendar one more time. Family Day is February 13th this year. So there's no fishing on Lake Joseph or Little Lake Joseph from January 1st to February 12th. Starting on the 13th, the rest of the year, you can fish on that lake. The following lakes all have restrictions for ice fishing as well. And I say ice fishing because this is when the ice is in. January 1st to the third Saturday in May, and then again in December. Haven't been on any of those lakes yet, but maybe I'll make my way up there this year. Not during those time frames, though. That would be for open water season in the summer. And there's a couple more exceptions for no fishing, January 1st to the fourth Saturday in April. And again, you just have to read. The way to use this is to find where you're going. If you're fishing Muskrat River, find the river or lake name, then see what the restriction is. The other ones don't apply to you, so you can gloss over them. And now we're into zone 16. So that's a really deep overview of zone 15. I'm going to be fishing up this way because it's fairly close to Lindsay and Peterborough, and there's a lot of Great Lakes, so I'm going to try to catch some brook trout and lake trout this year, and I'll be looking for the lakes that they stock them to increase my chances. We're going to do two more quick examples. I know this video is getting a bit long, but I wanted to show you one for zone 17 and then one for zone 16, and then that'll wrap it up. The reason I'm going to highlight zone 17 is I really want to work through just one example, and this is the way I would suggest you use it as well. So if you have an idea of where you're going, you can ignore all the other names and jargon and data in this regulation and just focus on what you actually need to do, and it's fairly quick. So what I'm going to do is the first time I go out ice fishing, because I'm a little bit nervous of the ice conditions and I want to make sure that I'm safe, I'm going to go to somewhere I've already been before where I'm comfortable. And that is on Chemong Lake, where the OFAH hosts its annual OFAH Family Ice Fishing Day. So for those not familiar with it, we have upwards of 1,200 people on the ice, and TackleShare and the OFAH provide all of the rods and prizes for all kids. It's a free event because it's during Family Day weekend, and we drill all the holes. Families just need to show up dressed warm and have a good time. However, unfortunately, because of COVID restrictions, we're going to have to cancel this year's event. But I'm going to go out to that same location where I know 1,000 people can be on the ice safely if the ice is thick enough, and try to catch some yellow perch. So let's go through the regs in zone 17 for Chemong Lake to see if I can fish for yellow perch in a week or two. So the first thing is, what zone is Chemong Lake in? It's in zone 17. It's right here between Lindsay, Lakefield, and Peterborough. It's a long, skinny lake, so it's well within 17, so I know I'm in the right zone. Zone 17 general information, again, the standard blurb to go look at the first part of the regulations we covered in part 1 and 2. There are several Great Lakes tributaries that have aligned regulations for rainbow trout, brook trout, Pacific salmon, and Atlantic salmon. I'm not fishing for those. I'm going for yellow perch, so I can ignore that line. The following water bodies or portions of them have different regulations that are listed in the water body exceptions: Lake Scugog and the Trent River. I'm going to double check that because the Trent River or the Trent waterway system includes Scugog, so I'm going to make sure that I look for water body exceptions. And the following species are not present in zone 17 and are closed to fishing all year: Splake. Not worried about that, again, because I'm going for yellow perch. So let's go now to step 3, zone-wide seasons and limits. And again, I can ignore all of these except for yellow perch because I'm just going for yellow perch. So it's open all year. Excellent. I can go next week, the following week, any week of the year I want. I can go fish for yellow perch. And the limits are 50 for sport, or 25 for conservation. I happen to have a sport fishing license, so I could catch and keep up to 50 yellow perch when I go out. I would be thrilled if I could even see 50 yellow perch through the ice, let alone catch a handful or that many. I'm just hoping to catch one. That's my goal, to show you what they look like and what works for me. So my maximum limits for the day would be 50 to catch. Let's quickly double check step 4, the provincial possession limits, to make sure that they align with 50. For yellow perch, there's a possession limit of 100, so I could catch 50 2 days in a row and be within the possession limits provincially. Now let's double check if there are any species exceptions for yellow perch. So species exceptions: Atlantic salmon, brown trout, Pacific salmon, and rainbow trout, not applicable to me. Walleye, not applicable to me. Perfect. That's how quickly you can go through that section. Water bodies exceptions: Lake Scugog and Scugog River. It doesn't apply. I'm not going to be on that. Or Lake Scugog or the Scugog River. Doesn't apply because I'm going to be on Chemong Lake. The Trent River has some exceptions, but those are not where Chemong is. I'm not worried about those. Same with this. So I've skipped species and water body exceptions right away if I'm going for yellow perch. I can totally ignore them because they don't apply to me. And then finally, fish sanctuaries. So let's see if there are any fish sanctuaries on Chemong that will prevent me from catching yellow perch next week or the week after. So there's no fishing closed all year, but that's for Cobourg Brook or Ganaresca River. Again, I'm not fishing those. Okay, so here's a couple. So Chemong Lake has a fish sanctuary. So let's investigate this so that I know when I'm out there. No fishing January 1st to the Friday before the second Saturday in May. So basically, January 1st, the first day you can start fishing is the second Saturday in May, and you can't fish November 16 to December 31st. That only applies to Chemong Lake, 100 meters on both sides of the causeway on County Road 16. So let's bring that up. What I did to find where Chemong Lake was, again, I just went to Google Maps, typed in Chemong Lake in Ontario. This is the only one that popped up. I know that's the correct one, and this is what they're talking about right here. So let me put it to aerial view, satellite view. So again, what this is asking, what the regulations are stating are that 100 meters on both sides of the causeway, I am not allowed to fish for ice fishing January 1st or open water if the water doesn't freeze until the Friday before the second Saturday in May, and then again from November 16th to December 31st. So 100 meters north of this causeway, which is right here, this bridge across between Bridge North and Ennismore. I can't fish 100 meters from the causeway to the north or 100 meters to the south. Where we typically do the event is out of Rotary Park right here, and we walk, and all the people from around Ontario that come to the event, it's a free event, walk out here along the snowmobile trail and fish off this point. And this is at least 100 meters away from the bridge. So I can still fish here where I plan to all year round because I'm at least 100 meters from this causeway. The reason this rule is in place, my best guess, is that just like dams, the fish get pooling in this area, and it's not fair if they get stuck against a barrier and can't pass through it and are forced to travel through a whole bunch of fishing lines on either side. So as soon as they get 100 meters away, they've got lots of access or ways to evade fishing lines and anglers, so it's more fair chase. Just to double check that this is actually 100 meters at least away, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, right click, and hit distance, clear measurements, let's see, let's try it again, right click, measure distance. And then I'm going to drag this, I'm going to click another one right about where I'm going to fish, right about there. And what that is telling me, if I zoom in, is that is 467 meters from the causeway. Now, if I move this over to really be accurate to the best of possibility, the closest it is 400 meters. So if I'm here, I'm well past the 100-meter fish sanctuary. In fact, 100 meters, let's try to see where it is. It's right about there, give or take. So it's quite close to this causeway. Let's just see if there's any more fish sanctuaries that apply to Shamong Lake where I'm going to fish. So I'm just scanning for Shamong Lake anywhere here, and I don't see it. The other option you can do is you can always hit Control F and then type in Shamong, and it'll find it. So it found it, the first one we already went over, and it found it all the way on 17. So it looks like it's only there, but let's just double check. Let's go through here. I don't see it on this list. Next page, and we're into 18. Okay, so that was quite easy. So that's a really quick way to see where you're fishing. So I know that took a little bit of a few extra minutes because I was specific with measuring the distance there, but I was able to skip a whole bunch of the regulations if I know where I'm fishing and what species I'm fishing for. So let's do one more example in zone 16 because I'm going to be going for some lake whitefish for the first time on Lake Simcoe, hopefully before ice closes, and I want to see what the rules are there. Lake Simcoe is up here in the upper right corner of zone 16, so I'm in the right zone. General information up here, salmon, trout, not what I'm worried about. I'm looking for lake whitefish, not looking for warmouth, and these exceptions, but we'll get to those in a few minutes. It does have Lake Simcoe listed there, so we will need to look for water body exceptions. That's just a little heads up. So zone-wide seasons, we're on step 3 already. Let's find lake whitefish. It's over here. It's open all year. Excellent. So I can fish, in theory, until we check for exceptions. I can fish next week or the week after for lake whitefish in zone 16. Because I have a sport fishing license, I can keep 12, and there is no size restriction. So let's go to species exceptions to see if there are any exceptions I need to be aware of. First, they talk about brook trout. Brook trout, salmon, trout, again, not applicable, so I can skip right along. And we're still on there. And walleye, so there's no species exceptions for lake whitefish I need to be worried about. Now let's look for those water body exceptions. I'm looking for Lake Simcoe. So credit, river, Grand River, Humber. It's all alphabetical order. So here's Lake Simcoe. It also covers Lake Couchiching, which is to the north of Aurelia. They're connected through a canal there, and Green River Trent Canal system, and their tributaries. But I'll be on Lake Simcoe, so that will matter. So again, we're looking for lake whitefish, herring, otherwise known as cisco, trout, lake whitefish. There's what I need to know. Oh, let's see if we'll just follow along here. Lake whitefish is open from January 1st to March 15th, and the second Saturday in May to September 30th. Now I'm going ice fishing, so the first part is really what's important to me. January 1st to March 15th. So I need to be there before March 15th, otherwise the season closes for the time being for lake whitefish. So if I go next week or the next week after that, I'm perfectly fine. And the limit is S2C1. So my limit is actually only 2 lake whitefish of any size because there is a smaller limit in Lake Simcoe than there was in the general zone limits, which were 12. So instead of 12, I can only catch 2. That probably means that lake whitefish are targeted quite heavily in Lake Simcoe, and they want to make sure that not too many are harvested per day. And let's just double check if there are any other exceptions for Lake Simcoe. This is alphabetical, so we've already passed what we needed. Let's double check fish sanctuaries. So we're looking for Lake Simcoe again. Otherwise, these are irrelevant to what we want to do. And I don't see anything so far. And just so I double check, because I don't know all of these tributaries, I'm not as familiar with that area, I am going to do a search for Simcoe to see if that word pops up anywhere. So Control F, Simcoe, so previous, fish sanctuary. So here's one, LaFontaine Creek and its tributaries, township of Tiny in the county of Simcoe at these. So let's see if this is on Lake Simcoe. I don't think it is, but let's just double check to be accurate and make sure we're not breaking the rules. So again, let's go to Google Maps. I'm going to get off of satellite. I'm going to type this in, take away the 2 periods that were causing me trouble, and zoom out where this is. So Lake Simcoe's over here. That's actually part of Lake Huron, so I don't need to worry about that. It's in Simcoe County, which is why Simcoe got flagged there. So I don't need to worry about that fish sanctuary. Let's see if there's any other Simcoes. We already looked at this one for Lake Whitefish. So it looks like I can fish for Lake Whitefish. I will have a limit of 2, and I can fish before March 15th through the ice, and that's the only restrictions. So that's how quickly you can go and find exactly the rules for where you're fishing and the species you're going for. And a lot of the regulations, again, you don't need to know all 447 pages. You just need to be able to find the lake or river you're on and the fish you're going for to find out the rules that apply to you. Before I sign up, I just want to remind people that if you've enjoyed this video and you want a hard copy of the 2021 fishing regulations, we have 500 copies to send out via mail at no cost, and it also includes some good things to get kids started with fishing. So if you want a hard copy, please fill out the form at OntarioFamilyFishing.com. This is for the license-free period over Family Day weekend, and we are going to start shipping these out to people later this week. So please take advantage of that. Again, it takes a couple of seconds just to say where you're fishing and your shipping address. We'll send you a copy of this, as it might be hard to find this year because of travel restrictions. So we'll send it right to you, and then you'll be able to reference it all year long based on what you've learned here.
Thank you so much to everyone for watching the third part of a 3-part series on how to read the fishing regulations. I had a great time going through them again and relearning what I had already known previously and learning a few new things. Taylor and I have some great fishing videos coming out, so we're going to be out hitting the ice next week and are going to show you basically what works for us, what didn't work for us, and pass along the fun. So stay tuned. Please like or subscribe to the page so that we can continue to send you great content, and please comment too. We want to hear from you. So without further ado, we'll see you soon, and take care. Bye everyone.